Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the 14th and final session of the fall 2017, winter 2018 Sunoikisis Digital Cultural Heritage semester. Today's session is run by Valeria Vitale from the University of London and Matthew Nicholls from the University of Reading, and will be on 3D environments and virtual reality. And I believe Valeria is going to join us first.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Gabby. So today's class not only ends Sunoikisis, but also the group of classes that we had about 3D technologies, and we're going to talk about 3D environments. And it's not always very easy, very immediate to distinguish what a static 3D model, like those that we have already developed together, and a 3D environment. And this is mostly because there isn't, at the moment, an agreement on a definition of what virtual reality is. So it's a little bit of a gray area at the moment. But we're not going to enter into this debate because what we're really interested in is how we can use this other family of 3D technologies to study, to investigate, to promote cultural heritage. Although we just said that there isn't, a lot of certainty and agreement on the definitions, I want to start with some definitions, also to make distinctions between different technologies in this area that are sometimes used interchangeably while they are not exactly the same. So I think it's good to make some clarity, but also bear in mind that very often, as it happens for the other 3D technologies that we have seen together, that we've seen before, they are employed together and they really disclose their better potential when they are employed together. So this is just a reference to have some clarity about the terms that we're going to use. And I'm now going to my slides. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's start with the main kind of virtual environments that we're discussing today, which are virtual realities that are often abbreviated as VR. And those are the computer technologies that, with a range of different techniques, simulate the presence in a virtual digital environment. And this is actually, if we want to if we really want to say what is, in my opinion, the big difference between a static 3D model and a virtual environment is exactly this concept of presence, simulated presence. That can be a first-person presence, as we are seeing now in virtual reality, or a third-person kind of presence through an avatar, that, as we'll see later, talking about real-time engines. But going back to virtual realities, this feeling of presence is usually mainly achieved through a visual stimuli. But not only, there are a lot of virtual realities that also have other kind of sensorial stimulation, like, for example, sound or smell or vibrations, haptics, and so on. The most common and possibly the most popular kind of virtual reality also tries to achieve this presence, this feeling of immersion through some technological device that needs to be wear on the body. And the most common, the one that you're probably most familiar with, are VR headsets, but there are also things that record the hands movement and arm and legs movement and steps and so on. But they are not This is not always the case. Some first experiments in virtual realities actually involved an immersive environment that was called the cave, and there weren't any additional gear needed, but it was just, let's say, the perception of a digital place as if it were a real one. Another technology that is sometimes confused with VR, and that's why I want to talk about it, it's actually a technology that has a lot of potential for cultural heritage. It's augmented reality, that is often abbreviated as AR, which is, in a way, the of virtual reality, because augmented reality happens live, happens when you are in the real place, and you can perceive a real place or a real object when you are in front of it, but your perception of it through a mobile phone, through your tablet, through your Google glasses, is somehow augmented by computer-generated elements. And a very, very famous example of augmented reality is Pokemon Go. If you ever tried Pokemon Go, where you look through your phone and you see, one of those little creatures in a museum or in the street, that's augmented reality. And I also want to mention another kind of virtual environments that are not maybe as immersive as virtual realities, but they're becoming quite popular in the study and teaching of classics and archaeology, and I think they really have again a very strong potential for it, which are real-time engines or game engines. And they're called real-time engines because what they do is basically render in real time, so very, very fast. Also quite complex 3D environment, and also calculate in real time the simulation of the physics reaction that might happen in this simulated environment. And if you have ever played video games, you know that even though this is not exactly virtual reality, they can be quite immersive. And another point that I want to make is that the fact that they are called game engines, it's because this kind of technology was developed for video games. But using game engines doesn't necessarily mean that we want to create some sort of ludic product. We can use this technology for many other purposes that are not necessarily creating a game. And now I want to give you a brief overview of what are some of the applications of these technologies for cultural heritage, for archaeology, for classics. And later on, Matthew will give you a very, very exhaustive demonstration of some of the applications of virtual reality for teaching, and a brief tutorial as well that will show you how this technology has become really, really affordable, and so it has become quite easy to transform the 3D model and the 3D environment that you created with a 3D software like those that we have used into a virtual environment, a virtual reality environment that users can experience through a very cheap cardboard headset and a regular mobile phone. Now let's see some of the examples. Let's start with VR applications, and one of the most obvious and actually most successful application of virtual realities was obviously museums, enhancing the visitors' experience when they are in museums. And for example, in some exhibitions there is the real artifact there on display, but also virtual reality experience that put that artifact in its original context or in its excavation context and so on. But actually, virtual reality is being used more and more often in museums without any artifact at all, because it allows completely virtual exhibitions or experiences. And for example, learn about the life of gladiators, and you can learn about how the Colosseum looks or used to look like, and what happened in the Colosseum without ever going to Rome, but being in an exhibition in Canada. And virtual reality has also facilitated the creation of completely virtual museums that have no artifacts at all, like the virtual museum in Herculaneum that doesn't have any material findings, although it's quite close to the archaeological site, but it is entirely based on 3D content, including a few virtual reality experiences. But virtual reality is also being increasingly used in archaeology to document and also to revisit archaeological digs. And we know that archaeology is an inherently destructive process. But if we document the excavation, especially if we document it at different stages, through photogrammetry or through the other imaging techniques that we talked about in the other classes, through virtual reality, archaeologists can virtually revisit those digs, even though they do not exist anymore in their materiality, and they can, look again at them and check if maybe, they have missed something or misinterpreted something, or if there is some ambiguity, they can go back to the recording of the dig and maybe find the answers they were looking for. Another possible application for virtual reality is allowing access to places and artifacts that are inaccessible. And I know that there are projects of building a virtual reality experience, exploring the theater in Herculaneum, which is this Roman theater that is intact underground the city of Herculaneum, but it is inaccessible, partly because it is very difficult materially to excavate, but also because it is very dangerous. It's still quite poisonous, so it's really not possible to go down there. But theoretically, through virtual reality, we would be able to explore it without risking any of the dangerous fumes. And another application of virtual reality that has been pursued quite successfully, and especially by Google, is that it allows us to visit remotely museum exhibitions. And not only that, but it keeps a record of the museum exhibition after the exhibition, again, doesn't exist anymore. So this is I think this is gonna change quite a lot the life of museum display and museum studies. But now, enough with some of the applications of virtual reality, and let's look at what augmented reality can do for us and for cultural heritage. And one of possibly the most successful application of augmented reality is that it offers us the opportunity to perform non-invasive virtual restorations on site. And this is incredibly useful, especially for archaeological sites, because it helps us with a quite widespread problem, that is that when tourists go to archaeological sites that have been advertised as fantastic, amazing, so relevant for our history, you must visit them. And then the tourists go there, and actually what they can see are basically, a bunch of rocks, and usually, walls that are not taller than 20 centimeters. They tend to be quite disappointed because a non-trained eye really struggles to picture how a building or an ancient place might have looked like. But through augmented reality, it is very easy to combine the aura, the experience of being in an ancient place, to be actually there, to see it with your eyes, to do so, but also through the augmented reality to have a much clearer idea of what that thing was in the past, so how it might have looked like in the past, and how the space was used, and what was the decoration of the furniture, and so on. And the image that you see in the slides, it's a very successful exhibition that is, I think, still on in Rome, which allows us through augmented reality to look at the area package that is now completely white. It's now, the marble is has lost all its coloring, and see how it's this hypothetical restoration when it was in full color. But a complementary application of augmented reality for cultural heritage, and especially for, you see that in a lot of touristic applications for mobile phone and tablets, is that it doesn't, not only delivers an hypothetical restoration, but it can also gives us more information about the place, making the whole experience of visiting an archaeological site much more rewarding. And augmented reality, it's very easy for the users to access, because you only need your phone or your tablet, and it's quite easy for the developers as well to make work, because it can be triggered by GIS coordinates, which is quite convenient, or by external triggers like QR codes or other things like that. But also, augmented reality can be used to enhance the experience, not just on site, but also in museums. If you have artifacts or fossils or things like that, you can think of virtual reality animations that give information about it, or add entertainment component. And if you are a natural history museum, and if you have fossils and dinosaurs, and if you're not using augmented reality to have your dinosaurs walking in the museum, I think that you are missing a great opportunity. But I think that one of the reasons why augmented reality is becoming so popular is that it's very engaging, and it really helps the public to engage with the actual site, but through the digital component. And it's very easy to add some ludic entertainment or gaming component to it. And I think it also facilitates some sort of playful appropriation of cultural heritage through things, that can appear whimsical or gimmicky, but that actually do create an emotional bond between the public and the cultural heritage. Like, for example, the possibility to take a picture with a piece of cultural heritage that actually doesn't exist. It used to be there, but it's not there anymore in reality. But through the augmented reality, you can take, your selfie with something that doesn't exist anymore. Let's now move to game engines, which are again becoming more and more employed into the study of cultural heritage. And although, as we were saying, they are less immersive, they still give you the opportunity to explore and to interact with a 3D environment. So I think they deserve to be mentioned in this family of technologies. And for example, the image that you see in the slides, it's an example of an archaeological study of the Italian site of Gabi, and you can explore through the game engine the reality-based 3D modeling of the ruins, but also a very synthetic hypothetical reconstruction of how the built environment might have looked like. And one of the pros of the game engines is that they rely on something that has been very much tested, because it has been tested for video games, which is a huge industry. So we are piggybacking on something that has been optimized, and the movement and the controllers they really works. And another pro is that many members of the audience are already familiar with it, and they already know intuitively how to move in a space that looks like a video game. We said at the beginning that using a game engine, it's a misleading term, and it assumes that we're making games, while most of the time we're not. But sometimes we are, and I think that using 3D environments and adding the gaming component to teach classics or ancient history, or to engage the public with the past, it's actually a very successful strategy. And this image is from a project that was going on some years ago, which was Digital Pompeii, that was using game-like environments with actual games and characters and looking for clues and things like that. And the purpose was to teach about life in ancient Pompeii using hypothetical reconstructions of actual Pompeian houses that were based on archaeological reliable information, but they were built as video games. And because Matthew is now gonna talk in depth about virtual reality, I want to spend just a few more minutes about game engines and make a few points that are actually common to different 3D environment, different kinds of 3D environments. And let's go back to this I think, false opposition between what are called serious games, which are products that use the technology of video games but don't have an entertainment kind of purpose. They have an educational purpose, a strictly educational purpose, like the flight simulators or the surgery training kind of video games. And the games that have actually the purpose of entertain, the purpose of having fun, basically. And I don't think the distinction is so strict. And if someone wants to use a gaming component, add a fun component in order to engage the public with the cultural heritage, I don't see anything wrong with that. And actually, I can say that very often, if you create a 3D environment that is just empty, the users won't spend there more than 40 seconds, less than a minute. It is very, very easy to get bored in a virtual environment if there is no purpose, if the user doesn't know what to do. You think that you have created this amazing 3D environment and users will spend hours exploring it, but you're wrong. So actually adding a purpose, adding something to look for, something to hide from, it can be a very good strategy, and I can assure you that it requires also a lot of talent to do that. A problem that is brought up looking at video games, but it does relate to all kinds of virtual realities. It's about the graphic style and the fact that video games are sometimes, even if we don't want to, they are the, let's say, the thing that our virtual realities are compared to. And we have to be very careful in managing the expectations, because nothing developed by a cultural institution is never ever going to look like Assassin's Creed or any other of these very, very expensive, immersive video games. And the danger is that because they don't look anything like that, our products, academic products, are going to look cheap and boring and not interesting enough. So I think that, again, it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of graphic talent to find a solution, to find a right balance. Also because we should bear in mind that creating a good product, or even creating an engaging product, it is not, doesn't revolve entirely on creating astonishing graphics. And I want to show you this video game I am particularly fond of. It's a 2D video game. It's not even 3D, but it is inspired by Greek-based art. It's called Proteome, and it tries to teach something about the Greek word, the ethos of the hero. It's something about religion and other things like that, but without giving you necessarily the astonishing reproduction of Athens, but focusing on on ideas, on mechanisms, on paradigms. And one last thing that we should bear in mind when we look at virtual realities and we experience virtual realities, or we try to create our virtual realities, is the uncanny valley. And human characters are the most difficult thing to add to a virtual reality environment or any 3D environment, because it is very, very, very easy to get it wrong. And this is the reason why in many virtual realities you won't see any. And if you're not familiar with the uncanny valley concept, is that it's a curve. And we tend to relate, we tend to feel close to things that are in human shape. And we are pleased by realism. But there is, let's say, a weird space between a synthetic representation and a very, very successful realistic representation that just becomes weird. So the failed attempt at realism is something that really disgusts us. And one very last thing before handing it over to Matthew, is that this is something I really want to stress. I see very often virtual realities and other immersive environments advertised as this thing is like a time machine. It's going to take you back to the past. It will be like being there. Which is not, of course it's not. In the best case, you're going to be immersed into someone's idea of the past, someone's visualization of the past, with all its biases and everything. So I think that the more immersive the environment becomes, the more important it is to stress how hypothetical that is, how much that needs documentation, and how much that is not a time machine. And I'm done, and I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and it's over to you, Matthew.
Thank you. That's, I'm turning myself on, and there I am, I think, in your monitor, which suggests I'm about to appear. So, how's everybody doing? I enjoyed that very much. Thanks very much, Valeria. I'm a Roman historian here at the University of Reading, and my talk, I hope, will find some points of connection with what we were hearing there from Valeria, possibly from the other end of the telescope, as it were, rather than surveying, as she did, the many excellent deployments of this sort of technology out there. I'll talk a bit about the kind of tools that I have found and used for getting my own work out to a variety of different sorts of audience, in the hope that having a look at some of these tools, which I think are fairly accessible, inexpensive, fun to use, frankly, might be useful for other people and fit in with something that you've learned earlier on in this course about 3D modeling for teaching, for research, for public outreach, various sorts of activity. So I'll go to my slides, and hopefully if I play these now, you'll be able to see this fly into the city of Rome. This is my 3D model of the city of Rome, ancient Rome, early 4th century Rome. And this had its genesis, really, I think, as a teaching and learning project here at Reading, grew incrementally over a period of years until it reached this stage of near completion. I think it will never really be finished. I use it for undergraduate and postgraduate teaching, and also increasingly for public outreach, public-facing work. We'll come on to that in a bit. And also for links to broadcasters and commercial software developers of the sorts that you've been learning about in the previous section of this talk, games firms, app firms, VR firms. And this is interesting work to pursue. You've just seen what a fascinating field it is. It's also the kind of thing that universities are increasingly interested in, certainly in a UK context. We now have what's called the impact agenda. We're required to demonstrate the commercial and social impact of our work on a quinquennial audit basis. So for a classics department that might sometimes find it difficult to say what impact on, as it were, the real world we've had, this kind of work can be useful, and therefore the university is happy for me to engage with it and is supportive of it. So it serves many useful goals. And it's also something I just tremendously enjoy doing, and it's very nice to be able to indulge in something one enjoys. So this is the model that is the basis for what I'm going to come on to talk about, and it contains maybe 600,000 discrete elements. You can view it as we've just done on a flyover basis. Later on, we'll go and start standing inside bits of it. It contains lots of detailed individual buildings. So here is one of them. This is the Baths of Caracalla, a bathhouse from the High Imperial period at Rome.
Matthew.
Is someone talking to me there?
Yeah, Matthew, can you hear me? We're not seeing your screen yet.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, let me try again. You're seeing me, are you? Thanks for the heads up. Let me try this.
Yep, that looks good.
Looking good. Okay, I'm going to run back to the first slide, which is quite a brief one. Are you seeing that now, Gabby? Is that okay?
Yes, it is. Yep, that's
great. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about that. So that's the model of Rome I was talking about, and there it actually is on your screens. And here is what I came on to talk about: the Baths of Caracalla in Rome, which is one of the individual models as a work in progress shot. And you can see the sort of workflow here. This will be familiar, I would have thought, from earlier work on digital modeling, so I won't dwell on it. But I'm working here in SketchUp, which I like for its ease of use and the way it's very flexible. It can plug into and talk to many sorts of different app and website and device, which I'm going to come on to talk about later. So here I am building in SketchUp from archaeological ground plans, from personal experience of the site, from site photographs, pictures on coins, literary descriptions, inscriptions, any bits of evidence that we can get to build up a picture of these structures. I try and feed into the modeling process. And it can be as simple or as complex as one wants to make it. This is quite a complicated model, as you can see from the cross-section. And here it is finished. So this is the Baths of Caracalla now, giving us a sense of the bathing block, a stab at reconstructing the gardens around it, a bit of colour in there and texture and height. And it's still a model that's floating free in this black void. So the way I tend to like to look at these buildings, and something that fits with what Valeria was talking about, is seeing them immersed, as it were, in their landscape, in their context. So moving away from just an architectural model of an isolated structure towards something that's claiming to be in a landscape or in a cityscape. So you can see here that the architectural model, there it is, can be integrated into a terrain model, which can be appropriately, I hope, dressed with textures and colors and vegetation. A lighting model above that, you can see now there's an artificial sunlight playing on that building. The city walls behind the bathhouse, and around it, the roads and individual humbler structures, street fountains, houses, apartment blocks of the city of Rome, trying to give a sense of the urban texture, the urban armature into which these grander monuments fitted. And that means we can start to use this kind of reconstruction now for an understanding of the massing and distribution of structures within the ancient city, sightline studies, illumination studies, Roman's eye views of buildings in a landscape. And all of that helps us towards the goal of immersivity that we were hearing about in Valeria's part of this talk, this idea of being within or getting to experience something close to the ancient environment in its completeness. Of course, it raises also quite serious questions about the levels of our knowledge, which is a question for all of us in this field, that this presents what might appear quite a, let's say, a realistic view. I think that term realistic is quite slippery and difficult, but I think we all understand what it means as a shorthand. It's making a claim about the environment this bathhouse was in, which is actually grounded in imperfect and partial evidence. So we're pretty confident about the wall in the background, we're pretty confident about the bathhouse. Actually, the buildings in the foreground are partly modelled after the marble plan, so we're fairly confident about some of those, but by no means all of them. Some of them are just guesswork, speculative modelling for creating this complete-looking vision of the bathhouse in its context. So it does raise some interesting questions about where the boundaries between knowledge and speculation lie, and how those boundaries can be elided by this kind of technology in a way that could be dangerous if we weren't explicit about it and didn't make it part of the discussion. But having said all of that, we can continue to show pretty pictures of what looks like a complete Rome. Here, for example, is an overview of the centre of Rome, the Forum and Imperial Fora. And this reminds us, or introduces again, one of the key advantages of digital technology for doing this kind of exploratory reconstruction, which is that with the same model, the same investment of time, we can do this helicopter view, and we can step down here within one of those structures, moving the virtual camera, as it were, from an overhead view to a ground level view. So this dynamic, repositionable, editable, manipulable quality of digital reconstruction, obvious, I think, to this audience, helps us see the same structures in different ways, from a very overhead, almost planimetric view, down to a street level view. And of course, we can alter various parameters if we wanted to. We could turn the textures off, we could turn the lighting off, we could alter reflectivity and specular and scattering qualities of all these surfaces. We could present a wireframe model, we could cut through it and turn various elements on and off. So it's a very flexible medium. And we'll hold that thought in mind, I think, because of some of the online deployment I want to come back to a bit later. This idea that it's a dynamic 3D creation, this, and although you're seeing it at the moment as static pictures, which is often the way it's presented, a level above that is moving pictures, animations, but those are still 2D videos, as it were, on a flat screen in front of you. A step above that, again, really harnessing the dynamic properties of this kind of environment and its potential for true immersivity in a virtual form of reality, is getting the user to manipulate the view for him or herself. And that's, to my mind, one of the end goals of this kind of technology. And we've seen that already in Valeria's introduction, is being able to step into a space and control where you're looking, what you're seeing, the angle of view, the motion through the space, all of these different parameters you can alter for yourself as a viewer. I think that's really part of the great attraction of this technology for people who, like me, like all of us, want to explore and present reconstructions or visualizations to potentially to a wide audience. So doing this is using new technology, relatively new technology, and using it in some new ways. And you've heard about the potential for gaming technology and virtual reality just in the last 2 or 3 years, really to shake up this field and add something new and give us a whole set of ready-made, beautiful motion engines and collision engines and rendering engines that the sector could never have developed for itself, but have kind of dropped into our lap because the people who make Assassin's Creed have paid for all the development work. But the practice of reconstructing ancient spaces and environments is not itself new, of course. It goes right back at least into the Enlightenment and back to the Renaissance, arguably right back to the ancient period itself, with this very long tradition of drawing and painting and imagining ruins in different ways. Now, the classic way of presenting an ancient building to a modern viewer is in this two-dimensional planimetric view that you see top left there, this plan of the Baths of Diocletian. This is quite heavy on bathhouses, this slide set, but I really like bathhouses, and they're a good way or a good example to illustrate the kind of thing I want to talk about. And you heard from Valeria about the way non-trained eyes, when they go to archaeological sites, can be disappointed or confused by, she said, heaps of stones. Quite right, this sort of partial, dismembered, disarticulated, colourless ruins of a civilization. It takes some training and understanding to be able to put back in the mind's eye. And I think that also applies actually to some of the ways in which these sites are drawn or painted. So the ground plan, which is a vital tool for scientific presentation and discussion, I find some of my undergraduate students, certainly some of the tourists I interact with, would find it difficult to turn that 2D plan into an imagined 3D environment. So we can add, and have added since you see here the 16th century at least, this 3D drawing to add the element of height and volume and perspective. And here you can see an imagined reconstruction of that same bathhouse, actually I think a pretty good one by Dupeyrac, below a 19th century watercolor, expanding on the idea of interior volume this time, of light and color and shade and movement, all done within the medium of painting. So a static two-dimensional medium, but trying to convey three-dimensionality, immersivity, movement. And all of these tools can be joined by the three-dimensional physical model. You see there the same structure now from Gismondi's famous Plastico model in Rome, which allows you to walk around the building now, so you can change your perspective and your viewpoint. But it's a protected museum artifact. I think it's actually inaccessible at the moment, but even when the museum's open to display, you can't get down to ground level and peer into it. So we can add to these various techniques the potential for immersivity of the three-dimensional model. So here's my model of the same bathhouse. And immediately you can see that digital artifacts, we can do different sorts of things with them. It's not to say they're better or worse than these other media for presenting the past, but they allow us to start to show a viewer who, remember, maybe a non-specialist viewer, you heard that from Valeria, and certainly you'll hear it in my talk too, can present these reconstructions in ways that hopefully are accessible, intuitive. So here, for example, is the same bathhouse reconstruction over a Google Earth screenshot of the same part of Rome where the bathhouse ruins are. And if we fade them out and then back in again, you can see the fossilized imprint of this bathhouse. The digital reconstruction hopefully makes it clear, if I do that again, where the, here we go, where the imprint of that building survives in the modern cityscape and how those scattered fragments can be reconstituted to form the entire bathhouse. And then, of course, the real virtue of this medium, as we've said several times already now, is that you can also change your camera position, you can animate it. So we're now seeing something a bit more dynamic, something with movement in it, something that transitions from a two-dimensional map-like view into a three-dimensional view where suddenly you have volume, color, the reflective properties you might be able to see in the water, height. So it's a different sort of way of presenting the same kind of information that actually archaeologists and historians have been interested in for centuries. When I built this model of Rome, or at least when I started building it, virtual reality, at least in a mode accessible to amateurs like me, did not exist. Gaming engines, again, that were accessible to people like me, didn't exist. But the nice thing about digital content is that a model, when created and invested in once, actually is very flexible in its exploitation in lots of different sorts of media. So you've seen a great survey from Valeria of all the different kinds of ways this stuff can be presented. And one of the things that excites me is that basically the same entity with modification perhaps can be exploited in all of these or many of these different technologies. So the real-time gaming engines that you heard about, I've experimented with, and these models sit quite well inside Unity, for example, which is a ubiquitous and free gaming engine where you can take things you created and drop them into a real-time environment and suddenly move around that, navigate around that on your computer and share it with people and walk around these environments together and integrate all sorts of different kinds of information or sensory input and motion into the immersive experience. And I've done that also in the Oculus Rift VR headset, so a proper stereoscopic VR experience, which is really quite compelling, actually. I might say more about that in a bit. So when we take this combination of digital content and tools for sharing that content in lots of exciting ways, and ways in which you've seen from Valeria, people seem to enjoy and engage with and appreciate, at least when they're done right, excuse me, I think we can start to see a lot of potential for outreach, for commercialization, if that's of interest, or at least for reaching large potential audiences with this stuff. For example, this is quite a straightforward deployment. This is, again, my model of Rome, but dressed up for broadcast by a professional virtual or visual effects firm. And this was licensed for a documentary about Rome on the Travel Channel. And this really, I think, rather beautiful footage was created by this professional VFX firm on the basis of my models, so my academic input, but I could never get close to this level of visual delight. And you heard about the importance of convincing visual effect from Valeria before. So we can immediately start finding commercial partners who will want to take this content and adapt it for their particular audience. It wouldn't be appropriate for me, even if I had the skills, to invest my time in making this sort of cinematic overflight. But it's quite appropriate for a documentary company to want to do that. And I think the results were very interesting. And similarly, I've been working with and talking to app firms, smartphone app firms, to virtual reality developers, to IT consultancy firms who are interested in how this market is developing. And something that we've seen as we've done this work is that in surveys of the public, one of the things that excites people about VR as a new consumer technology, and it is still in its infancy, is the appetite for stepping back into environments that are now inaccessible to us. So that might be, for example, going and standing on Neptune or the moon, a place you could never go. Or it might be stepping back into a past environment where you can also never go. So people talk about going back to see the building of the pyramids or standing as a gladiator in the Colosseum. And that sort of response from potential consumers is a very significant one, and one that is seen consistently in surveys of the sector where people think they might be tempted to buy a VR product or to engage with a VR product, which of course interests the museum and heritage sector who want to capture that audience, and interests academics like me who want to reach out to that audience as well. Kind of meet people where they are. You've heard from Valeria about people's experience in gaming. Certainly when I talk to my undergraduates now here at Reading, what got you interested in the ancient world? What brought you to want to study ancient history or classics? A significant proportion will say playing Rome Total War or playing Assassin's Creed. It's that kind of experience now that got people interested in the past. And so I agree with Valeria when she says it doesn't really matter if these games are in themselves accurate. I mean, in a sense, of course they aren't, they're fantasies, but they're fantasies that contain a grain of historical set dressing or background that piques people's interest and gets them wanting to learn more. So for us as members of the Academy, of course, that's really a fantastic opportunity to step into that space and offer something for ourselves as well. So I'll talk a bit now, if I may, about a way in which I've sought to do that this year. That's to take the model of Rome that I've built and put it to a new use, and that's within a Mooc. And if the ugly acronym Mooc doesn't yet mean anything to you, it stands for Massive Open Online Course. And this is an initiative that many universities have been engaging with for the last 4 or 5 years or so. It started places like Stanford in the States, and it rapidly spread. And Moocs are universities putting together free, public-facing online courses to engage a global audience with an aspect of their research or their teaching. So you heard in Valeria's talk about global learning communities, about people being able, for example, to visit museum exhibits in Canada virtually, virtually step into the Colosseum, even if actually they were in Toronto or wherever. And this is similar with Moocs. You can get a taste of university learning without physically going to the campus, without even being in the same country. And they're put out there by universities for a variety of different reasons. There's a philanthropic impulse to share knowledge and share learning. It's something that funding bodies like research councils like to see. Public engagement and public outreach is now often a condition of grant funding. Universities, of course, want to recruit potential students. So there are a lot of good reasons for universities to engage with these Moocs and to provide something. We learned fairly early on, I think, in the Mooc business that what it isn't is just putting a camcorder at the back of the lecture theatre. It's not the same as repackaging on-campus learning and just broadcasting the videos. It works best when it's a rich form of multimedia learning that combines video with discussion, with written articles, with quizzes, interactive steps, as you'll see. Another thing that it isn't is documentaries. I've made a number of documentaries, and that's fun to do, but those are short form, one-off bits of film, essentially 30, 40 minutes, where you have half an hour to tell the whole story of your bit of the Roman Empire, and it's a broadcast medium. So the viewer is passive. They're watching documentaries, and at their best, Mary Beard and people can be really excellent communicators, but the learner is sitting at home watching the video. They're not really moving beyond absorbing passively. And something that 3D we've already seen has this great potential for is active, immersive, virtual participation in an ancient space or a recreated environment. So it seems to me quite a good match, actually, that this Mooc environment where you're trying to get people to explore and engage and discuss in a way that is not quite the same as undergraduate or postgraduate learning on campus, but starts to approximate to an active form of learning, is a good fit for this technology that encourages immersive, active participation as well. So what you're seeing on the screen, anyway, are the banner images for a number of courses on the UK Mooc platform, FutureLearn, which is a company owned by the Open University, in which several dozen UK universities are partners. These courses that various partners have put out on aspects of the ancient world. So Southampton's course on Portus, which is Rome's ancient harbour. Newcastle's course on Hadrian's Wall, Life on the Roman Frontier. Reading's own course, Archaeology from Dig to Lab and Beyond, which tries to explain to people what the discipline of archaeology is and how you might study it at university. So beginning when you survey a site and maybe dig something up, but then tracking the history of those artifacts through their exploration, analysis, and presentation. So there are various ancient world courses out there on FutureLearn and other Mooc platforms. And I, for all the reasons we've been discussing so far, wanted to add my own contribution to that and offer a course on ancient Rome, and that's what I'll show you a bit now. So there is the course homepage for my course, and if I swap out of Keynote now and go into the FutureLearn website, here it is, and I might try just showing you the trailer of it. We'll see if that works. It's about a minute.
Welcome to the city of Rome. This beautiful city has been inhabited by humans for 3 millennia. And on this course, we're going to be looking at Rome at its pomp, at its height, about 2,000 years ago, when the emperors here ruled a vast swathe of territory from Hadrian's Wall to the Nile Delta. You might well think of Rome as a city of monuments: the Colosseum, the Fora, the arches, the columns, these grand statements of power and wealth, the busy arterial roads, all those roads leading to Rome and from Rome. But while we're doing that, we're going to be looking at it as a working city, a living city, trying to tease out the evidence for those non-grand monuments, the aqueducts, the sewers, the street fountains, the apartment blocks, the warehouses, all the stuff that sustained the life of the city and made possible that lovely veneer of grand monuments on the top. We're going to be looking at the huge 3D digital model of the ancient city that I've built over the last few years at the University of Reading, teaching my students. And by flying around this model or walking through it, we can get a glimpse or a sense of how the city may have appeared all those years ago.
So that is the trailer for the Mooc, and I hope it gives you a taste of what it was we were trying to do. It's 5 weeks long. It's free for people to take. We've had about 23,000 people take it so far from countries around the world. And there are themes running through it. We talk about different categories of architecture. We also try to explain how we know what we think we know about ancient Rome. So trying to diffuse that challenge I set myself earlier of how these models risk looking glossy and perfect and kind of over-promising the level of our knowledge. We try to use the digital footage combined, as you saw there, with real-world footage to give people an impression or a taste, and then to step back and explain where does this information come from. So we talked about archaeology, we talk about epigraphy, about numismatic evidence for buildings, about poetic testimony on life in the city of Rome from people like Martial and Juvenal and Virgil, for example. So we try to enrich the visual reconstruction of Rome with a kind of background of information about how we got there. And we're trying to achieve what Valeria talked of as a feeling of presence, of being in an ancient space, or understanding an ancient space through a mix of different kinds of media, including the 3D and the visual. Now, the unique selling point, as it were, of this course is the digital reconstruction that it's built around. And I hope you've seen it's not all about the digital model. We spent a week filming in Rome to try and combine real-world footage with the digital footage, for example. But I think the thing that is the standout feature of this course is its use of this digital artifact at its heart. So the way we offer it to people through the course is manifold. You've seen just in that little trailer a sense that we quite often cut from real-world footage to a corresponding virtual view. So trying to balance out what people might see on the ground with what they would have seen on the ground 1900 years ago, 1700 years ago. And that's partly to address the point that Valeria made, that people want to go to Rome, and it has millions of tourists per annum, some of whom, it has to be said, stand in the forum feeling puzzled and a bit disappointed. And if we can try and show them what they would have seen at that point, and you've heard about augmented reality as a great tool for doing that, this Mooc is attempting to do something similar with that mix of real world and digital footage. And then we also have within the Mooc a number of elements, we call them steps in a Mooc, where we take virtual content and we foreground it. So every week we have 3 or 4 categories of building, which I introduce with a 4 or 5 minute video. I'll just kill the sound here. Oh, that sound, by the way, is a doctoral student of ours playing a reconstructed Greek double aulos. So that ancient flute music is another little taste of the ancient world that we give people in this course. Anyway, when we get into the videos after that intro, you can see, if I just skip through it, there's a lot of rendered footage of the model with a voiceover from me. You can see subtitle captions on the screen. If I just embiggen it briefly, you'll see the sort of thing I mean. Where we use a digital model to illustrate categories or types of building. In this case, it's bathhouses again. There we flew out from a pair of granite columns that still survive in Rome that we filmed, and then we talk about them in the Mooc. lovely rippling water. I was very pleased with that, I have to say. The Baths of Trajan on the Esquiline Hill, zooming out to look out over the Colosseum Valley. So trying to contextualize individual structures within the wider city and moving from that kind of immersive inside the building view to this more traditional overhead planimetric kind of view. Try and familiarize viewers with the idea that what a building looks like in plan form, you can then move into it on the ground, as we're doing here, same bathhouse from the different angle. So that's one way in which we use this content and try and make it immersive, try to give people a sense of being in the ancient space. But I think the really unusual thing that this course does, actually, is what I'm about to show you now, which I think is the best fit for the topic that we're discussing now, which is actual virtual reality for people to play with. So I said earlier on that one of my animating enthusiasms with being in this field is the potential for 3D work to bring stuff alive and let people explore it for themselves. And the way we do this within the Mooc is that I've adapted a bunch of my models and put them onto a cloud server called Cubity. I'll show you how to do that in a minute, where from within the Mooc, you've learned about bathhouses, you can now step into a Roman bathhouse and fly around it for yourself. So all of those virtues of controlling the viewpoint and the angle and the position that I talked about earlier on. So you see we've stepped from the Mooc platform into a link page on Cubity. This is a website. So all the user has to use is their tablet or their browser on their desktop. And we wait a little while for the model to load up. Here it is. And hopefully you can see now that I'm controlling this in real time. You can see some helpful hints appearing on the screen of how to control it. And we can go where we want to within this. So this is, I'm just panning and zooming around it at the moment. I've got a sun slider if I want to change the illumination. So we can have a fun with imagining these bars in the morning or the afternoon. I can take my little man here and drop him in. Let's go in front of the bars. So there we go, now down at ground level. And I've now got a sort of a Google Street View of this building. I can walk or run around it. I've even got a little jump button, which is a nod to the gaming experience, I guess. So I can now be within this bathhouse, or as we are here within the gardens, and explore it in real time. And this is something that I don't think Mooc learners have been able to do before, to take control of bits of ancient Rome and explore them for themselves. You might see on the screen that I can take a Google Cardboard view. If I was using the Cubity app, which is free on my phone, I could scan that QR code, and that would take me into a Google Cardboard virtual reality view. There's potential for augmented reality as well within this app. So if I wanted to print out a ground plan of the building, I could then view the 3D reconstruction sitting on top of the ground plan in my phone in augmented reality. So this Cubity tool seemed to me a really nice fit for our Mooc for various reasons. It's free. I pay a small annual subscription for it because I'm serving this model out to thousands of people, but the basic version is free. It integrates with existing technologies like the phone and the Google Cardboard. And most importantly for me, it integrates extremely well with SketchUp, which is my principal modeling software. So if I show you quickly how I work this, this is the free Cubity app that I've loaded to my computer. And if I take my Finder window here, I'm going to take this SketchUp model. Here's one I made earlier. And I'm just going to drag and drop it onto that Cubity app window. You can see here there's a progress bar. Here it's already ready. The program crunches it and optimizes it for online deployment and gives it to me on the screen for me to play with. So there's my sun slider, and I should be able to manipulate it or fly around it. Sort of a fly around here. So that drag and drop, which I just did in real time, took about, I don't know, 10 seconds. And there is my model sitting on the screen ready for me to deploy. If I want to share it on the web, I press the web share button. Here it is served out via WebGL in a browser page. So you can start to imagine the pedagogical or outreach potential of this. If you have models that you make or your students make, or you want to share with students, you can fairly instantly share it with as many people around the world as you want to, and do so in a way that lets them take control of this content and step into it, either on a flat screen here, or in an Oculus Rift or HTC Vive, or in a Google Cardboard. It seems to be very neat technology for sharing stuff, which I think is part of the communicative aim of this virtual reality project that we have. So Cubity, and there are various other technological solutions that do this as well. It just happens to be that Cubity and SketchUp are the ones that I use. Allowed us to take this 3D content and give it to people actively rather than just passively. Now, we were going to be joined, as I understand it, by Thomas Flynn from Sketchfab, who sadly couldn't make it. So if you want, I can show you Sketchfab for a couple of minutes as well, or if we're running out of time, I can stop there, Gabby. What would you like me to do?
We're a little bit at the end of time, but sorry, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, cool. Got a new microphone. But yes, maybe we could rather than necessarily going into it in practical detail, we could talk for a couple of minutes about ways in which students who've done some of the 3D exercises earlier in the course, which basically involved, building a small reconstruction in SketchUp, doing some photogrammetry, editing that photogrammetry, editing both of those things together, and so forth. How they might take advantage of game engines, virtual reality engines, and so forth. What are the simplest first steps they might want to look at? You've mentioned Cubity.
Yeah, I would certainly advocate Cubity as one thing they could try out. One of the beauties of this is that I'm going to stop showing my. Actually, I won't stop showing my screen. So I'm going to show you one more thing. One of the beauties of this is that a lot of the apps are extremely user-friendly and free, which is the best of both worlds. Cubity is one. Sketchfab actually is another. So we at Reading, we have this archaeological museum of Greek ceramics called the Your Museum. And we had our students laser scan or photogrammetrically capture a whole bunch of our pots, which for obvious reasons they're fragile. We can't take them out of the case. And we used Sketchfab, which I hope you can see on the screen now, as a repository for this. Sketchfab is an online user community with millions and millions of models that users upload for free again and then view for free. So we put a bunch of our pots in here, and I've taken one at random, this Aribolos, this pretty little pot. We can now view it virtually and spin it around. We can annotate it. You can see there's some information laid onto it there. Again, you can see perhaps that there are tools for viewing in cardboard, and if you want to, you can go to a wireframe view, all sorts of different options within SketchUp. Very elegant interface. So that's useful to your students in a couple of ways. One is as a way of uploading and sharing their content instantly, so their viewers, maybe the marker of their assessment or the audience with which they want to share this stuff, doesn't have to have a copy of the modeling software to hand or know how to use it. They can serve it out on a server like Sketchfab in a way that's really very, very elegant and user intuitive to use, and can reach a public audience instantly and for free. So Sketchfab is a great way of sharing stuff. It's also a great way of finding stuff. So if you were interested in, we talk about Roman bathhouses a lot, let me search for Roman bath. There we go. There's a lot of content on Roman bathhouse that people have uploaded to Sketchfab. So for example, here's a photogrammetric capture, it looks like, of an archaeological site of a Roman bathhouse at Aquinum in Lazio in Italy. So not only can you put your own stuff here, but you can find millions and millions of models other people have put here. So tools like Sketchfab and like Cubity, there's another one I use called Augment for augmented reality, are very free and easy ways of discovering content and sharing content, I would say.
Great, thanks a lot. Yeah. And Valeria, feel free to jump in with any suggestions as well. And Valeria was going to or had been experimenting with using Unity as well as a game engine for this sort of thing.
Yeah. Let me come back to life. Yeah, there I am. Yes. Sketchfab actually has a quite easy to use and intuitive VR application that if you click on that icon that Matthew was showing with the cardboard, you can actually tweak the VR settings of your file. So for example, that reconstruction of the Ecclesiasterian in the Temple of Isis that we did in the previous classes, and that Tom Flynn showed us how to optimize for a Sketchfab view. If you click on the cardboard icon, there are some VR sets that you can tweak, and then you can experiment with a cardboard and a mobile phone and try the teleport movement in Sketchfab, with which I'm not particularly good. So I'm not going to give a tutorial about it, but it is very easy to set up. And I think that Unity 3D, which is this game engine that both me and Matthew talked about, it's a very complex software in the sense that has a lot of possibilities, and it is actually used in its pro version to develop very successful games, among which our Assassin's Creed. But it has a free version that is that everyone can download, and the basic step of making your model explorable, it's very easy. It's just a matter of drag and drop, not as immediate as the example in Qubity that Matthew showed, but it's very it's really quite simple. And Unity also has a very large community of users, so it's full of tutorials on how to do that. And unfortunately, we don't have time to show a Unity tutorial. Maybe we could think about that for another class next year. But I mean, if you feel a little bit adventurous, give it a go. Google for the Unity tutorials. They are on the Unity website, and just give it a go. It's easier than it looks.
I don't know if I can be heard at the moment, but maybe I can. Something I would just add to that I should have said earlier, I think, is that using tools like Unity, you can then, if you have access to the kit, you can put on a proper full-blown VR headset with a separated left and right eyes and the motion tracker, like a Rift or a Vive. And if you've not tried that, it really is worth having a go, I would say. I put models of my own through Unity and other technologies into this, and was really struck by the experience. Because you start to have proper proprioception, proper vestibular input into the movements of your head and your body, you feel so much more immersed in this space. And for me, the big impression was how enormous these Roman public buildings I built were. I should have known that because I'd made the models, but until you actually step into them on a one-to-one scale and have to physically move your body around to look around them and move through them, the scale is something that you lack, I think, on the screen. So it's a really exciting technology, and it's becoming more and more accessible.
Yeah, great, thanks. Does anyone else have any comments or questions for either Matthew or Valeria? I'm looking on YouTube, and no one's asked any questions there yet.
Can I ask something to Matthew? Oh no, Tom, you go. You were going to.
I was just going to ask to what degree you are both grappling with or thinking about digital archiving and preservation of the materials that go into the production and presentation of these kinds of environments and the models that go with them.
Yeah, that's important.
It is. Valeria, do you want to go first, or shall I?
Either way. You.
Well, it's a very important question, and I don't think I'm doing it terribly well is the answer, because my project developed piecemeal over a number of years. If I was starting again from scratch, I'd have a proper, I think, GIS-driven database with all the artifacts mapped into it and linked to proper geographical data points, and an archive of all the metadata of the model, and make that somehow accessible through the model. That's the other half of that question. So you can click on a building and see all the inputs that went into it. And my model doesn't do that because I didn't have the foresight to try to build it that way. So it's something I've learned about through making errors, I guess, or through not building that into my workflow. But I think it is important also because this stuff has quite a short shelf life, actually. Whatever we do in the digital space is kind of lasts as long as you pay the server to host it, and then it's gone. So archiving and backing up will be a challenge, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's easier to talk about that theoretically because I've never done such a massive work like the one that Matthew has done on Rome. So, for me, it's easy to talk about, best practice and how documentation is important and everything. But, I know that in the practice, it is really a challenge. What I what I am trying to pursue is a mixed approach that tries to leverage the potential of linked open data and trying to associate URIs for the specific building to the material that refer to that building. So we have somehow connected the 3D model and the documents that we use as reference for that 3D model. I think that could be a first step towards at least grouping together or creating a connection between the 3D product and some of the sources that have inspired it. And I think that gazetteers would play a crucial role in that, actually.
Can I ask what's perhaps deliberately a naive question following up from that, which is, to what degree is the data that you produce, so when you make your models in SketchUp or when you make your models in 3D Max or whatever software you use, and the VR models that are produced and the various other kinds of software that is produced by this, to what degree is the data independent of the software? So if SketchUp ceased to exist or ceased to be free, ceased to be affordable, various other software ceased to be the go-to software for this, to what degree would that data still be useful to you or to someone else in a different environment?
I think it's well, the future is unknown to us. So I don't know what the answer would be, but it's an important question because you want this project to have some longevity, which is one reason why I've stuck with SketchUp as the main modeling tool, even though others are available. It's got this enormous footprint in the world now, and I think people will be using it for a long time. And also, crucially, it talks to lots of other modeling formats, so you can export from it into other standard formats like .3ds. So insofar as there is a single mainstream modeling data format, hopefully a lot of my stuff is in it. Where I think I've created more kind of cul-de-sacs is where I've taken it into more specialist apps for the rendering, like Cinema 4D and Lumion, and particularly Lumion, which is kind of a beautiful walled garden. You can't export from it. That will only be valuable to me as long as I pay for a license for Lumion, and will be of no use to anybody else who doesn't have that very expensive software. So there are kind of blind alleys, as long as you know that the main bulk of your data is in something fairly universal. Hopefully that's a way around that. But you still read articles that talk about archiving this stuff on 5.25-inch floppies and so on. The world just moves on very, very quickly, and we don't know what will be out there in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, to echo what Matthew said, I think that having a backup in one of the exchange formats like Collada or FBX, that can help. It's not a solution, but that can help to always have a backup in this, let's say, interchange format. But again, in my relatively let's say smaller experience as a modeler, in the sense that I have worked at a building level and not at the city level most of the times, I have tried to document the information related to my model. And I don't know how much scalable that is, but what I've tried to do is actually record measurements for the 3D parts that I was building, so that if, in 20 years' time, if someone still, cares about my model and 3D Max is not accessible anymore, virtually it is possible to rebuild the model with the same measurements, because the measurements are saved in the documentation. And this might be, maybe a little bit over the top and only applicable if you have a relatively small model. But that's another strategy that I've tried to pursue. We'll see, what happens in the future if someone comes up with a, more straightforward approach to that.
So in practice, or in principle rather, not in practice, your linked data ontology for documenting your 3D models is one candidate for the interchange format, because It's not just, when you say you're documenting, you're not just making notes. You know, this was 3.2 meters high, which someone could come along and reconstruct by reading your notes. But it's in a digital form, which could, in principle, be programmatically turned into a new 3D model in a different format.
Oh yes, totally.
Right?
That was,
in a way that, you know,
that
an
was the
SKB
point.
file might not be. Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, it could even, you know, automatically be turned into another 3D file, you know, because, you know, the ontology is, you know, language machine. So theoretically, you could write, you know, an algorithm that says, you know, transform, you know, S height in, you know, the value of S height in the height of this 3D, another 3D element. So yeah, that was the aim, to actually make it, you know, a standard, something that can be exchanged and can, you know, survive.
In the way that a lot of tools that already exist can take an SKP file, the output from Sketchfab, and interpret it into their own format and create a new model in their own format from it. SKP isn't an open format in the sense that it's still owned by whoever owns SketchUp now. It's not Google anymore, is it?
No, it's Trimble, yeah.
Right. So what we really want is an open format which is powerful enough to do, because, you know, if you save it as an OBJ, that's an open format, I believe, but it doesn't. It loses, you know, a lot of the information which you would have in SketchUp or in 3D Studio Max or whatever you're using.
I think that FBX, it's a good. It's actually a good middle ground, and I tend to do my backups in FBX. But yes, I think that we need to think more about this. We need to have more strategies, and possibly more than one at the same time.
And the other part of the question that Tom asked about archiving is where do you put your FBX, your OBJ, your SKP, your linked data, and so forth? I mean, saying you've backed it all up and you've got it on a spare hard drive in your bedroom is one question, but what, you know, do we? I mean, these files are much too big to put on GitHub, right? So where do we put these things?
This is a question with no real solution at the moment for me, and I've got gigabytes and gigabytes of data. And the university, I say Christian, they're very supportive to me, but they give me, you know, this desk and those bookshelves because that's what academics need, and they haven't yet realised that academics now also need a couple of terabytes of drag and drop cloud storage for free, because I have no recurring grant funding to sustain this. So unless that becomes just an institutional norm, this kind of project will have a cliff edge where, you know, your grant runs out and the server turns off and you lose the data. So I do have a hard drive in my bedroom, and that's not a perfect backup solution.
Yeah, same. I mean, for smaller things, I try to use online repositories like Sketchfab or 3D Hop. But again, I mean, if I had a project as large as Matthew, that would be, you know, a complete different, you know, issue, because you cannot put, you know, a model of Rome on Sketchfab. Maybe the single houses separately, the single monuments separately, and they will be, I guess, slightly compressed as well. But I mean, large-scale projects, they are actually, you know, a big issue of preservation.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that, and thanks for that important question, Tom. So we're more or less at the end of the slot. Unless anyone has any urgent points, any major points they wanted to bring up, we could stop here. I don't see anybody shouting, so can I? Yeah, I just thank Valeria and Matthew again for this very exciting and stimulating session. This has been the last session in. I've just seen someone on YouTube also saying thanks. It's not a question, but it's a passing on there. Thanks from Scott Vanderbilt there.
Hi, Scott.
So yeah, this was the last session in what was billed as the fall 2017 Sunoikisis Digital Cultural Heritage module. It overran into January, but that's now the last session. So I wanted to thank also Tom Elliott and Rada Varga, my co-organizers of this semester. The next year, this module will happen again in some form, but my role in it will be taken by Valeria, who will be running this module in at the University of London instead of me for this semester. But before then, the Sunoikisis Digital Classics regular programming comes back in about 3 weeks' time. In fact, the spring semester starts, which I'm helping to pull together, and then starting in April, the summer semester that's run by Monica Berti, who's the silent figure behind all of this. Even in the sessions that she's not running, will happen for the summer.
Well, can I say a few things?
Yes.
I have to talk now. First, thank you very much, of course, because this semester was really great. Thank you, Rada, Valeria, Tom, and Gabby, of course, because your contributions are really great. And we started 4 years ago, and I can't believe that now we are here. Of course, this is not a Mooc. Maybe we share the 2.0 and the C is open, is online, is a course. It's not massive because Sunoikisis is a consortium specific for digital classics, but still, the idea is the same: to share ideas, to share our research. I'm very happy to see all these things. Really. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Monica. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this semester closes now in a moment, but if you stick around, there'll be a new one starting in a few weeks. So, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.